Just want to say first, thank you for the opportunity to come and testify here. I largely agree with a lot of the comments that Dr. Holland made, and I will submit written testimony, but I'd prefer to actually just have a conversation with you guys about this effort here and then submit more detailed written commentary later on. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Dr. Malik Bernett. I'm a preventive medicine physician by training. Uh, Focusing largely on drug policy and its effects on human society. I've been very much involved in the efforts towards reforming cannabis policy around the country, helping to write legislation and running the campaign to legalize marijuana in Washington, D.C., helping to write legislation in Maryland, Massachusetts, Ohio, Tennessee, a number of states up and down the eastern seaboard, Georgia, and even in my home country of Jamaica. Overall, given all of the experience and the data that we have to date relative to changing cannabis policy, it is a very safe assumption to say that the decriminalization, taxation, and regulation of cannabis has been widely successful in pretty much every jurisdiction that has endeavored to take this on. You see significant decrease in youth access. Youth use is also down, as was previously testified on by one of the physicians before. That Monitoring the Future survey, if you look at it, the youth use rate has been relatively flat since the passage of legalization in Colorado in 2012. There's even a state-based analysis in Colorado that looks at a more detailed and granular level at youth use, and it has shown that youth use has actually gone down over the time that legalization has taken effect. Additionally, there have been significant decreases in arrests. If you look at my jurisdiction, Washington, D.C., in the year prior to legalizing cannabis, we had approximately 2,700 arrests. In the year after ending that, we dropped the total arrest numbers down to 12. So that's a sizable change. Significant criminal justice savings was gained there. And then if you look at property values and taxes, a lot of people make the claim that, oh, if you bring in cannabis-based businesses into a particular area, you'll see a depreciation in property values. That actually is not true. You're seeing significant increases in every state where there is a legalization in warehouse values per square foot, in overall commercial real estate values per square foot. There's been significant increase in not only in the buildings where cannabis businesses are located, but in the surrounding community and the property values surrounding those buildings. The crime rate in and around cannabis operations goes down as well, given the significant security and oversight that those businesses provide to the surrounding community. So, but most importantly, as Dr. Holland alluded to, there is a significant benefit gained by moving cannabis from a prohibited state to a regulated state, insofar as you can actually have honest and open dialogue and a public health framework about what responsible use looks like. Right now, largely public health departments have their hands tied when it comes to discussing responsible cannabis use. They generally have to revert back to the law of saying, well, it's illegal, so you can't do it. The same is true for physicians and for patients when they're coming in to talk about their cannabis use with the physician. They can't really actually have an honest discussion because they're fearing criminal reprisal. So changing that paradigm is instrumental and critical to advancing the public health efforts around safe and responsible use for cannabis. If the state does move in the direction of legalizing and regulating cannabis, I want to talk about a few policy provisions that I think are important to maintaining the success of any program that you all would consider. And the first one that I'd like to highlight is the importance of maintaining the opportunity for individuals to cultivate at home. Now, while there's been sizable amounts of fear around this whole notion of home cultivation, I can tell you that in D.C., which is a city that's very dense, much like the city of New York here, we actually have legalized up to home cultivation of 12 plants for any individual inside their home, and that has gone wildly successfully. We started this in 2014, and currently there have been no episodes of houses exploding, houses burning down, or any of the other scare tactics that prohibitionists might come up here and tell you would happen if you were to cultivate cannabis in your home. cannabis is a plant, and much like people grow tomatoes or sage or basil or whatever other plants that they grow in their house, cannabis can be cultivated in much similar fashion. I want to say that that's an important thing because not only does it significantly lower the stigma that surrounds cannabis broadly in the community because everyone will be growing it, but two, it provides an opportunity for those patients, medical patients specifically, who have significantly larger demands because they're using cannabis for medical purposes, to be able to supplement the cannabis that they may go and buy in a dispensary with their products that they're cultivating at home, and that ultimately causes them to have to be able to save money because, as we know right now, cannabis is not covered by insurance. So all the costs that individuals are using to seek medical care with cannabis are borne out of pocket. So it's important to consider the ability for individuals to cultivate cannabis at their home when moving forward with any legislation that you might consider. The second topic that I'd like to raise, which I think is an important one for you guys to consider, is the concept of diversity and inclusion inside the cannabis industry. It's a critical issue because right now, as many people have already stated, the vast majority of arrests in cannabis prohibitionary states have been born in communities of color. And what we're seeing now as we look at new markets emerging is that there's an absolute dearth of diversity in the emerging cannabis industry, with roughly 1% of all businesses being owned by people of color. It's important that you all make it a very concerted effort to do a number of different provisions, and I can talk about a few of them that have been implemented across the country. For example, there's an equity program in the city of Oakland where essentially they are favoring individuals who live in historically overly policed districts where the arrest rates for cannabis are particularly high. So if you live in this jurisdiction and you are endeavoring to get into the legalized market, then the city of Oakland will look favorably upon your application and move it to the head of the line for consideration amongst all the other applications in order to ensure that there's diverse representation inside the community. So issues and provisions like that are important ones for you to consider. Additionally, in Massachusetts, I'm working with the city of Boston to create what are called economic empowerment zones where cannabis businesses can be concentrated, and you can use the ability and the job creation ability from the new emerging economy in those zones to employ the surrounding community and provide jobs to those individuals in that community, which facilitates greater acceptance of the cannabis businesses in the community because the people who are living there are actually benefiting economically from the jobs that are created there, and you can actually much easier recycle the proceeds and the tax revenue that are generated from that economic activity in that community back into the same community to create community centers and job training programs for other types of industries and what have you. So those are a number of provisions that you could consider as you are looking to go about taxing and regulating. The other provision that I'd like to bring up is licensing broadly. And I think it's absolutely critical, and a lot of states make this mistake, is in that you all be very intentional in eliminating as many of the monopolistic provisions that exist inside of the jurisdiction or inside the regulatory regime as possible. So, for example, there's a major discussion around vertical integration, which is basically combining all of the various component parts of the cannabis business model into one company. So the company cultivates cannabis, it processes cannabis, and then sells cannabis to the consumer. This is highly problematic in that it basically is a monopoly, and then that causes lots of political chicanery, skullduggery, and backbiting in the licensing process itself, and ultimately leaves licenses to those who are wealthy and well-connected. An alternative sort of strategy which you can pursue is, the three-tier licensing system, which you have seen in some states where there are direct licenses for cultivation, then licenses for processing, and then licenses for distribution. And California took this one step further and then subdivided all three of those tiers into small, medium, and large licenses, which essentially allows individuals, regardless of their economic starting point, an opportunity to be able to get into the industry, because you can appropriately tier the costs of the licenses relative to the size of the license that you're getting into. And that in and of itself opens up the opportunity for more people to be able to participate. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about some provisions beyond taxation and regulation of cannabis that I think are important for you all to consider as you're reforming cannabis laws. First, I want to talk a little bit about pre-employment drug testing. So if we're going to, allow for decriminalization and ultimately legalization and regulation of cannabis, naturally adults over the age of 21 will be using cannabis, and then they may face the problem of actually having to get a job and fail a drug test, because the vast majority of jobs still conduct drug testing via urine analysis, which unfortunately tests historical use rather than active impairment. There are a number of solutions that you could approach to this. In DC, we implemented a provision that prohibited all employers prior to actually onboarding an employee from forcing them to take a drug test. So once they've been offered a conditional position at any company, then you fall under the purview of the company's private policies, and the state can't really effectively regulate anything as it relates to activities inside the private company. But in advance of getting the job, the district does effectively prohibited employers from forcing individuals to be able to, or to have to take a drug test. The alternative strategy that you guys could pursue is mandating at the state level the use of oral fluid testing. Oral fluid testing, much differently than urine analysis drug testing, allows you to measure active impairment, which is actually what I think employers are looking to measure. They want to ensure that people are not impaired while on the job, rather than being concerned with what it is that they're doing outside of work hours. Additional provisions are record sealing and expungement. We have passed both record sealing and expungement inside of the District of Columbia, so individuals who have previously been convicted of any crime that is now decriminalized, which is inclusive of the vast majority of cannabis-related crimes, have the ability to have their record sealed and ultimately expunged. This is important because there are, as you all are well aware, significant collateral consequences associated with having a criminal record, and that ultimately undermines people's ability to participate effectively in society. And so having those records sealed and those records expunged now, because the activity that was previously criminalized is now legal, is critical to ultimately ensuring that healing takes place from the historical wrongs of prohibition. Finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about eliminating the provisions around drug testing as it relates to probation and parole. There's a significant amount of challenge with this in the District of Columbia because of our court system, and our probation and parole system is housed in the federal government. But we were endeavoring to eliminate the ability for corrections or probation officers to hold someone accountable for using cannabis while they're under the state control by using drug testing, because if it's legal for them to use cannabis out in normal society, they shouldn't be held accountable for that while under probation and parole. I'll stop there, and I'll answer any questions that you guys might have. But again, like I said, I'll submit these comments in a much more detailed written format after this hearing. So thank you so much.
We will have questions, but before we do that, we have been joined by Linda Rosenthal, Chair of the Assembly Committee on Alcoholism and Substance Abuse. And Linda, if you want to make some opening comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Gottfried and other members of the panel. I just like to say I'm happy to be here. I'm happy that New York is finally taking a comprehensive look at this most compelling issue. We like to be first in everything. We're not. But perhaps this hearing will inform our future actions. As the chair of the Committee on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse, we talk a lot about the opioid epidemic. We don't talk so much about other substances that people are using all the time and do not have the same impact that substance use disorder has. So I'm keen to make the difference between use of different substances and their impact on people's lives and on society. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that later today, but just happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Bernett, first of all, It is good that you'll be sending us your written testimony because you had a lot of important things to say, and I think you were challenging our note-taking ability.
Sorry
Certainly
about
mine.
that.
No, you had a lot to say. The jurisdiction that allows home cultivation was which?
So there are a number of jurisdictions that allow home cultivation. California, Oregon, Washington, D.C., Alaska allows home cultivation. Essentially, every state except for Washington that has legalized cannabis for adult use allows for home cultivation.
Yeah.
The new Vermont law does also.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
That passed on Tuesday.
I think that gardening is therapeutic, and having a patient create their own medicine and tend to it and tend to themselves. I'm sorry to get all crunchy granola, but I very strongly encourage the idea of people being able to grow their own medicine.
By the way, not to make light of anybody's addiction, but there is really no shame in being addicted to binge watching Netflix.
I'll let my patients know.
I will confess to that. Actually, I find running West Wing episodes in the background on my laptop enables me to get a lot more work done on into the night.
Excellent.
Well, it does produce sleep deprivation because it keeps me working longer than I probably should. But enough of that. Dr. Bernett, you mentioned all fluid testing.
Oral fluid testing, so saliva testing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That answers
That makes
my
sense?
question.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, not all fluid, oral
Right.
fluid.
Okay. And your comments on vertical integration, I agree wholeheartedly. When the New York system for medical marijuana was implemented, it was done requiring vertical integration. It still largely does. I believe that the health department is close to recognizing that the law doesn't require vertical integration and that things would be a whole lot better off if we enabled people to be licensed to do one segment of the process. In most industries in this country, vertical integration is illegal and is
Exactly.
regarded as an antitrust violation.
Right.
It is quite adamantly outlawed in New York, always has been, well, since the end of Prohibition, in the area of alcohol. And I can't think of anything other than marijuana where the law requires vertical integration. So
It's a vestige. It's when we were first doing a lot of these laws, there was sizable amounts of concern regarding security.
yeah.
And that overwhelming concern led people to say, hey, well, let's just hold a few companies accountable for all the process, and that may be more secure, but it is certainly much more monopolistic.
Yeah. I mean, I personally think there's a lot more opportunity for shenanigans when everything goes on within one organization.
Absolutely.
Rather than when there is a paper trail from one stage of the process to another. It's also absurd that in New York, that if you are producing your marijuana somewhere upstate and want to deliver it to your dispensary, if you want to use the Brinks company or somebody else that knows how to run secure transportation, you are barred from doing that. You have to use your own trucks, which makes not a lot of sense. Other questions?
Yes, actually, I could really almost applaud after hearing your testimonies because, for full disclosure, my whole impetus for getting engaged in this topic and sponsoring this legislation along with Senator Kruger is really the social justice piece of it. It's almost criminal what we've done as a country of locking people up for what you say, doctor, is simply a plant that's grown in the ground, and anybody can grow it. And so I really do appreciate your testimony more than you know. am encouraged by the whole issue of home cultivation, because I actually do believe, and as a matter of fact, I personally know people who would not be able to go to work every day and have raised their families if they didn't have the ability to go pain-free. And they do that not because they take opioids. So I'll leave the rest of that to your own imagination.
Certainly.
People, as you say, doctor, will self-medicate because they know what they need to do to make it happen in this world. And this whole idea of, governments getting excited about the amount of money that can be made from this, and I know there are a lot of people excited about it. I've been to a cannabis expo before. I've seen the number of business people who are in the room, and none of them are people of color.
Right.
Not any of them. And so we would create another crime if we allow all these resources to be made and not have people who have been disenfranchised by marijuana to have an opportunity to be in business. And so I would love to have more information about how you all work that in D.C. I do know that we do have a piece in our legislation, our state legislation, that will require that there be people, I would say people of color have opportunities for business.
Sure.
And the other thing I wanted to mention is that we did not have that provision in our medical marijuana bill. And so we literally just, I want to say the beginning of maybe November, finally have an African-American owned company that's dispensing this product in upstate New York. I don't know if there are any down in the city, but literally, years later, through a struggle, you finally have an opportunity for a black person to be in business for something that, has quite frankly decimated many of the communities that they come from. And so I am encouraged by both of your testimony. I'm glad you put yours in writing, Dr. Howland. Some of us get a little challenged when we want to go back and find things to pull together our arguments for moving this legislation forward. And Dr. Bernett, I look forward to receiving yours as well. And thank you all very much for your comments.
Sure. Assemblywoman Peoples-Stokes, I wanted to answer a question that you had asked in a previous session regarding the Schedule 1 as a deterrent. So if you are looking at that same, so there's another national survey, and I think it's very, very telling, National Household Survey on Drug Use and Health. It measures basically all of the drug use in society today at a national level. And so cannabis has been designated as Schedule 1 substance for roughly 70 years now. And year in and year out, every time they take the survey, cannabis is the most widely used drug in the survey by some 22 million people every year. So if the question is, does Schedule 1 designation deter anyone from using cannabis, the answer to that question is clearly no. And that then begs the next question, which is, since we know so many people are using cannabis, can we find out a better way as a matter of public policy to effectively regulate that activity? And so I think that that's what we're doing here today, and I wish you guys best of luck on going forward with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.